Let's move on to 5A, and speaking of a tough team to stop, Westfield has rolled this season, 10-1 in the season, ranked number 1 in the 5A state poll. They win at McCutcheon, 48-21 last week. They'll be coming to Fort Wayne to take on Snider. Russ Isaac's telling us today that game is moved to a 7:30 kick to allow for some more travel time. But obviously Westfield is a very talented team out of the Indianapolis area.
Right.
So what do we know about Westfield and what do we know about Snider in terms of what they're going to have to do on Friday to move on?
Well, I think you look at Westfield, and I was looking at their schedule. They play a strong schedule. Mm-hmm. This isn't like an SAC team that's Snider has played all these tough schools, and then they're playing a team who hasn't had that. Westfield's had that. They've got excellent receiver that's heading to Ball State, I believe. So really big playmaker. They've got a strong offense, strong defense. If you look at some of their scores over the course of the season, I think Snider, if they've gotten better, it's defensively. I mean, they had the huge stop against Northside this last weekend. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. This looks like a real struggle to me. This looks like one of those 14-10, 17-14 games.
Yeah, and you mentioned the defense of Snider. Obviously, they've tightened things up. Played very well in the last 2 games. Only gave up a touchdown to Wayne and gave up just 14 points, which included overtime to Northside. So, as far as Snider goes offensively, they've only averaged 16 points a game in the playoffs.
Right.
This Westfield team was up 45-0 at halftime last week against a pretty good McCutcheon team. So if they're going to match offenses, I don't think Snider can necessarily do that this week.
No, I would agree that if it gets into a shootout, then Westfield has got the advantage because that's the type of team they are. Snider's got to have nice long drives. They've got to control the ball and not give too many opportunities to Westfield.
When you take a look at just the history of Snider in the playoffs, Westfield doesn't have that great of a history.
Right.
If you go back, their last sectional was in 2007. Granted, some of that is the competition that they play, but you know what Snider does in the playoffs. Kirk Tippmann took them to state last year. You figure in 5A this year with the top 32 teams, or the biggest 32 schools moving up to 6A, that thins out 5A a little bit. Mm-hmm. You got to be kind of licking your chops just knowing what Snider has been able to do in the postseason in terms of a historical perspective.
There's something to be said for having been there before, and sure, a lot of it's the coaches that have been there before, not necessarily all the players, but the players feed off that. As you look at any high school program, if they come up expecting that success, expecting postseason success, more often than not, they can continue that. It's kind of the opposite. If you haven't had that success at the regional level, mm-hmm. then you wonder, okay, is this where we kind of tap out at?
And one thing I don't think that can be overstated is Snider's ability to make a play when it counts. We've seen it in the last couple of weeks. Really, it's been Donovan O'Day, essentially a little bit of both weeks. He had the pick for an interception, and that went for a short touchdown against Wayne, which was a huge difference maker. And then last week in overtime, the defense making big plays. So although it hasn't always been pretty, they've stepped up when they've needed it. That's kind of a trademark from Snider football.
Yeah, I think you could characterize Snider as not a pretty team. I mean, in the sense that, you don't see some of the spectacular plays week after week you would see from some of these teams that maybe aren't even playing anymore. But Snider, they go in the mold of their coach, and that is a tough guy who always wants to get the best out of his players at this point in the season.
Instead of saying they win ugly, let's just say they are opportunistic. There we go. We turn what sounds like a negative into a positive.
I like it.